Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. I'm Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and Josh, we get it. You love Mussolini. Can you just leave us alone about it?
Yeah, lots of praise for Benito Mussolini in this film. In this season of Awesome Movie Year, we're talking about the films of 1969, and we're here at my pick, which is The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, starring Maggie Smith in an Oscar-winning performance as the title character, a teacher in an Edinburgh all-girls school in the 1930s, who is a bit too into Mussolini, I think we can say.
I mean, it's your pick. I figured you'd pick it because you're a fascist and you watched it with the rest of your Proud Boys.
Yeah. No, I don't think this movie is trying to promote the fascist views of Miss Jean Brodie here, who is also big into Franco, the Spanish dictator, and presumably would be a big Hitler fan, but we don't quite get to that point yet.
Don't forget, she's also trying to pimp out her students. So
she is. She's not a good teacher, which is one of the things that I think is fascinating about this film.
Well, she might be a good teacher. She's just not a good influence.
Yeah, I think she's probably also not a good teacher. But you're right. We maybe don't see enough exactly of classroom instruction to understand that. But she's definitely a bad influence, certainly on these girls. This is an adaptation both of a popular acclaimed novel by Muriel Spark and a play. The play was adapted by Jay Presson Allen and became a huge hit both in London and on Broadway. Vanessa Redgrave starred in the version in London, receiving a lot of acclaim there. And Zoe Caldwell, who starred in the Broadway version, won a Tony Award for her portrayal of Miss Jean Brodie. So it was already a very well-known property with very well-known performances as this character. And I think it's interesting that whatever the reason is that they didn't get one of those actors to be in the movie version, Maggie Smith, I think, is fantastic. Obviously, she won the Oscar, but she was coming into this role that was so well-known for other people having played it.
And they offered it to Redgrave first and also to Julie Andrews. So, either one of them, they've done all right with their careers. I feel like Vanessa Redgrave, with the stuff she's maybe said over the past 20 years, maybe she would have fit this character a little better.
You know what? I feel like I've either missed or tuned out or forgotten those things, but that is unfortunate. Yeah, I think it would have been interesting to see Julie Andrews because it's like a contrast to her, say, in The Sound of Music, where she plays that pure inspirational figure who fights fascism, in fact, and would have been an interesting sort of departure for her. But Maggie Smith is fantastic in this role. She did win that Oscar for Best Actress. This movie was also nominated for an Oscar for Best Original Song for Jean, which is not, I think, one of the more memorable aspects of the movie. In fact, I finished watching the movie, started looking up that information, and didn't even remember there being an original song in it.
I think they just play it over the end credits, don't they?
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe I was kind of tuned out at that point. I don't know, but it was nominated.
It's not a great song though, so don't worry about it.
And it did not win the award. But the movie won and was nominated for a number of other awards. It won the Best Original Song Award at the Golden Globes, so some voters liked it, where it was also nominated for Best Motion Picture Drama and Best Actress Drama for Maggie Smith. It won 2 BAFTAs for Maggie Smith again, and Best Supporting Actress for Celia Johnson, who plays the headmistress, who is fine, but I would not necessarily have picked her as the one to win an award from this.
My guess would have been the lead girl in Brodie's Brood, who's kind of like her adversary. That she was probably the one I would have picked for supporting actress if you're going to nominate someone here.
Right. Well, she was nominated at the BAFTAs. Pamela Franklin, who plays that role.
Sandy.
And I agree, was really, really good. But she lost to Celia Johnson. So maybe one of those cases where that's an actress who had a long career and perhaps was being acknowledged for that kind of thing. But certainly lots of awards attention on this, lots of acclaim. It initially didn't do that well at the box office. Ultimately, though, grossed $6.65 million on its $2.76 million budget. So did, make an okay amount of money, but was not a huge hit, and probably not, especially in comparison to how successful the play had been.
But that's okay, man. Again, not everything has to be the Avengers, Josh. Let it go.
True. I'm just relaying the facts here. But
Miss Jean Brodie would definitely side with Thanos.
She would. She absolutely would. She would totally root for Thanos.
Yeah.
Yeah. So critics were positive about this, but it was interesting. This is another case. I feel like this has happened in a handful of occasions. I remember, like, in our 1939 season, looking up reviews of Gone with the Wind, and because that novel was such a sensation, all of the reviews talking about that. And the play was such a big deal that the reviews really spent a lot of time comparing it to the play. But I tried to find stuff that was more about the movie itself. So Vincent Canby in the New York Times said, "The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie is actually a very decent movie, but it will probably be underrated because it must seem smaller than the big, extraordinary performance that Maggie Smith gives in the title role. There hasn't been such a display of controlled, funny, elegant theatricality since Laurence Olivier soft-shoed his way through The Entertainer 9 years ago. Miss Smith's performance is a staggering amalgam of counterpointed moods, switches in voice levels, and obliquely stated emotions, all of which are precisely right. It's true that the shape of the movie becomes almost arbitrarily melodramatic, and that some motivations are obscure, but I couldn't care less. It's enough that Miss Brodie and a dozen other subsidiary characters are very much alive during confrontations that run from farcical to tragic."
I mean, I kind of got caught up where he basically was saying, this is the most riveting performance in the last decade almost since Olivier, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he's saying in general if this is the best performance since then, but specifically, I guess this kind of performance. I have not seen that Olivier film, The Entertainer, nor have I actually even heard of it. So.
I mean, I go right to 67, Dustin Hoffman and The Graduate. I would have to disagree with Vincent Canby.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not sure that he's saying that this is better than something like that, but this particular kind of big theatrical performance, this is the best one since then. So, I mean, that Dustin Hoffman performance in The Graduate is a very different kind of performance.
Okay, Josh. Yeah. I'll let you escape on a technicality here.
I mean, I don't know. I'm just kind of that's my sense of what he's saying, but I may be wrong. And I mean, I think Maggie Smith is fantastic here. I don't know that I would necessarily say that was the best performance of this whole past decade or whatever, but her performance is certainly the element that is singled out here in many of these positive reviews.
Listen, she won the Academy Award. She's a legend. She's great in this movie. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying I don't think of it as like a decade defining performance.
Right. Well, maybe not. And maybe also because The Graduate is this seminal movie in film history, whereas this has been, despite having won that Oscar, has been a bit lost. That makes a difference as well. A lot more people now are seeing and talking about that Dustin Hoffman performance and that movie than they are this movie. Certainly.
There you go. In the tank for Miss Jean Brodie already. Here we go, Dave.
Mm-hmm. So Variety, in their unbylined review, said, "Maggie Smith's tour de force performance as a school teacher slipping into spinsterhood is one of several notable achievements in this sentimental and macabre personal tragedy. The story, set in 1930s Edinburgh, treats in a tenderly savage way the decline of an age-resisting schoolmarm who lives too vicariously through a select group of prodigy stooges. The telling involves elements of warm humor, biting sarcasm, pity, contempt, betrayal, and despair."
Yeah, I mean, I guess we kind of look at the word spinster differently because, as she reminds us very often, she's in her prime and she's just banging out wherever she wants to be.
Well, right. But I think part of her constant reminding that she's in her prime is a sort of denial, right? That at least by the end of the movie, we're meant to understand that she is in fact not in her prime. Yeah. And however old she is, and I mean, she doesn't seem old. And of course, Maggie Smith, I don't know, she's probably in her 30s or something. And, in 1930s Edinburgh, she might well have been Celia Johnson, decrepit old wrinkled lady at that point. But I do think the point is that whether or not we're judging her ability to, get married, that she's definitely not in the prime of her life anymore. And she's self-centered in a way that we come to realize over the course of the film.
Yeah, she was 35 in 1969, Josh. Still plenty more years to bang out.
Yeah, so true. So true. So finally, Pauline Kael in The New Yorker was typically verbose. I tried to boil this down. She said, when Muriel Spark's witty caricature of the teacher is moved to stage and screen and enlarged to be the complete person, she becomes a witty monster. There probably wouldn't be any play or movie, or much fun either, if she weren't played as a glorious eccentric. But after we've been invited to fall in love with her, it seems to me we rather resent it when she is cut down and becomes a mocked heroine. It's a great showy role for an actress, but my guess is that there's no way of interpreting it that would seem right. The distortions that come about when a character in a novel becomes a star turn on the stage or the screen are only part of the problem. The material, literate and charming and good as it is, may be fundamentally unsatisfying. But the material is so compelling that I think, despite the flaws of book and play and movie, we are always engaged.
Yeah, so I mean, when doing the research on Wikipedia, Josh,
the place for research.
Well, I mean,
I did too.
There aren't many corners of the web dedicated to the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, but there is a whole section on the differences between the book and the play and the movie. Right. And I did think it was interesting. Obviously it makes sense. The book, there's so much more internal monologue and thought process, and it kind of has to change the focus. In the book, she's got 6 girls like that are kind of in her cult, the cult of Miss Jean Brodie, if you will. So,
right.
And then they narrow it down to 4, which is smart for here. You got to have that. But I do think, hypothetically, it would be interesting to read this book and see what the differences are.
Yeah, I mean, and the book itself was highly acclaimed too, and has also kind of stood the test of time and has been named to various lists of the best books, the best English books, best of the 20th century and things like that. And apparently the story in the book is all framed as this kind of recollection of the adult version of Sandy, Pamela Franklin's character, the student who kind of turns on Miss Jean Brodie when she is a nun as an adult, which is a somewhat surprising development from the character that we see, I think, as depicted.
Are you saying that she turns on her when she's a nun, or you're saying in the book she's already a nun and she's recollecting about the time that she had with Miss Jean Brodie?
That's what it is. She is an adult. It's many, many years later, and she's a nun, and she is recollecting about her time as a student with Miss Jean Brodie when she turned on her, as we see in the film.
Yeah, well, nothing will get you to the nunnery quicker than banging out your art teacher, Josh.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I almost included our friend Paul Schrader's review, but the majority of his review was about how hot Maggie Smith is. So I mean, we don't need to do that.
She's a beautiful lady.
She is, but it was focused in a way that did not seem rewarding in terms of evaluating the film.
Yeah, you'd much rather focus on your love of Mussolini. I get it.
Yeah, Mussolini a hottie too, I think.
Il Duce.
I bet Miss Jean Brodie was definitely hot for Mussolini.
Oh, she seemed to be hot for everybody.
Well, yeah, that too. So, Jason, had you ever seen this before?
Nope, never had. But Josh, you came in and you said, hey, I'm picking it, so you better watch it. And guess what, Josh? I watched it.
That's good. I'm glad that you had enough respect for me to do that. So, David, you seen this?
I had not, and I hadn't even heard of it. But I was glad I watched it. I watched it on a beach, sitting on a beach chair.
Okay, that is an odd way to watch this film, but
I think that might be the moment that we can consider the prime of Mr. David Rosen.
Yeah, that is true. Dave's on vacation on a beach, but still engaged in his love of cinema. So
that's right.
Wonderful.
That's right.
Yeah, interestingly, I don't think I would have ever heard of this movie or would have even thought to be able to pick this for our season, except for my grandma, my late
noted
grandma.
fascist.
Yeah, the fascist. No, about 10 years ago, this is my little story of seeing this film the first time. Like 10 years ago, I took a trip to the Midwest where my grandma lived outside Chicago, and I was visiting some friends, and I was going to a wedding, and I stayed over with my grandma for one night, and we went out to dinner and came back, and it was like, what are we going to do? And she happened to have this pile of DVDs, like random movies that she had taken out from the library that she wanted to watch. And we were like, well, let's watch a movie. And so I picked this, I think probably just because it was one that I hadn't seen before, and I didn't know anything about it. And I kind of assumed, as the movie gets you to assume, that it would be this cozy, like inspirational teacher movie. I thought it would be like a grandma movie. And I think in part because it subverts those expectations so effectively. As I was watching this on this like little TV at my grandma's house, which I'm pretty sure was showing it in the wrong aspect ratio because it was an old, CRT TV, I was just blown away, and it stayed with me all that time. And so for this season, I thought I'd love to check it out again.
Josh, there are plenty of white Fox News loving grandmas who would probably call this a grandma movie.
I will defend my grandma, who is no longer here to defend herself.
I'm not
a Fox News loving person.
I like your grandma. I met her. She was an active lady, and she might have been in her prime even at the time when I met her.
She was really in her prime, although, and not to be crude, but she also liked to date.
She was banging out a lot.
Through her 80s. Indeed,
yeah.
She was. So good for her. But I don't know. I don't recall if she had gotten this movie because she liked it and wanted to watch it again, or if she had seen it before. But I definitely found it very memorable then, and I really liked it again this time. So I hope this isn't going to be one of these episodes where Jason just insults my taste.
I mean,
the whole time.
I'm not. I part of me wants to just for fun, but
thanks.
no, I didn't dislike this movie, Josh. It's not the women. So
well, that's good. Yeah.
And I've got your back anyway, Josh.
Thank you, Dave. As you don't, I feel like the women, nobody.
Yeah, you were alone on that one.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to say about the background of this film, Jason?
Well, Josh, I'm sure we're going to talk about him, but I kind of wanted to mention the director of this film, who was kind of a fun discovery. Is it Ronald Neame?
I don't know, or Neame. I'm not sure. I don't know any more than you do how to pronounce his name. So we'll just mispronounce it a bunch of different ways.
Yeah. So he was fun to kind of research. He was a producing partner with David Lean, produced Brief Encounter and Great Expectations, received 2 Academy Award nominations for writing. And I watched 2 of his other movies this week and really enjoyed them. He's kind of a lost figure. I'm not going to say he would have been a major figure, but he was a good working director for a long time who made some really nice movies.
Right. And the interesting thing about him is that his career as a director was like his third Hollywood career. I mean, he started working in the 1920s and was a cinematographer, had dozens of credits, and then was a screenwriter and producer, as you said, along with David Lean. And it wasn't until like 30 years or something into his career that he started working as a director, and then made some big movies and was acclaimed and worked all the way into the 80s. So, an incredibly long and varied career. But I think maybe because he was kind of that journeyman, both in terms of his different positions and in terms of his films, there's not a lot of connection between the various movies he made. He's not as well known as maybe he could be. So
he is not, but we're changing that right now, Josh.
We're doing our best to give him his due, and I'm sure we'll talk more about his career later. But for now, we will come back and talk about our general thoughts on the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we are talking about my pick, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. And Jason, you said you kind of liked it?
I liked it. I didn't love it. I think that's fair.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, obviously she's the central figure and she's great. The supporting romantic figures kind of get lost or maybe don't necessarily get the roundedness that you want out of them. But the relationship between her and the girls, the Brodie brood or whatever she calls them.
The Brodie set, yeah.
Yeah, those are the best relationships. And I agree with you. It's interesting because you're like watching this woman and you're like, oh, she's captivating. Oh, she's riveting. Oh, she's terrible.
Right. I think that's what's great. And it comes up kind of slowly because we have, and I don't know if they would have as many of these expectations in 1969, because I feel like this kind of movie really took off later on. And we've seen so many of these inspirational teacher movies now. But a bunch of reviews did reference Goodbye, Mr. Chips, which I haven't seen, but was a very famous, I think, like inspirational teacher movie. So it was something that was known. And I think you start this movie and they set it up, right? She's the free-spirited, unconventional teacher that all the students love her, and she gets them excited about learning. And then there's the stuffy headmistress who's like, oh, you got to follow the rules or whatever. And we're on her side. I mean, this is why I disagree with what Pauline Kael is saying, where she's saying as an audience, we are upset that we're on her side, and then we discover that maybe we're duped by her like the students were. But to me, that's what's so great about this film, is that it has that evolution, like you said, and it starts slowly. You know, the first time she references Mussolini, it's almost like this quick aside, and you could be like, wait, what did she say? And then it snowballs.
Yeah, it's confusing. I'm going to get back to that in a second. Goodbye, Mr. Chips. We referenced in our 39 season, that was the first year it was made as a film. Also in this year, 69, Peter O'Toole was nominated for Best Actor for the remake of Goodbye, Mr. Chips. But to your point, Josh, I was like, what? Mussolini? I mean, I get it's before like the World War, maybe so I'm giving her that leeway. And then she brings in Franco. And I'm like, I studied history and I'm like, Franco, like, I know Franco was a fascist. What is going on here? Like, am I mistaken? Am I confusing this? Was Franco the good guy? So I literally had to look up Spanish history to make sure I was right and be like, yo, this lady's a psychopath. That's what it is.
Right. And I think that it's fantastic as you realize that. And it parallels that realization that comes from Sandy, from Pamela Franklin's character, who also starts out being so admiring of Miss Brodie, and along with those other three girls that we see as her cult, as you say. I mean, she really does come across like she's a cult leader, the way she manipulates these girls. And so I think it's great the way that it builds. And yet Maggie Smith is still charismatic, is still someone that you want to like. And it shows you how people like this can be, these cult leaders, or,
literally all the people she likes.
Right. Exactly. Or even on a smaller level, she's similar to these kind of like social media influencers we have now, where there's a whole cottage industry of like attractive conservative women on social media who are, saying the worst possible things while they have like thirst trap pictures of how hot they are.
It's strange. Josh, I do want to, so she's got these four girls that we focus on. There's Sandy, who's the brains of the operation, let's say, right? There's Jenny, who's the beauty, right? There's Mary, who's the sad one, the one they all pick on, I'd say, right? And
yeah, I mean, they other girls pick on her, and they kind of try to take her under their wing, it seems like. But yeah.
And then there's Monica, who's the forgettable one.
Right. It's good that there aren't six like there were in the play, because as you say, even Monica here, she gets a little lost.
Josh, tell me about this whole thing about how Miss Jean Brodie was trying to basically hook up Jenny, who I think is 17, maybe 16 at the time.
Yeah, I mean, she's
like 16, right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it takes place over the course of several years. And by the end of the movie, they're all seniors in the equivalent of high school. So they'd be 17 or 18. But she definitely launches this plan when Jenny is like 14. And she gets the idea that Jenny is going to be the great beauty, as you say, among these girls, and is going to be the lover of this art teacher, Mr. Lloyd,
who Miss Jean Brodie is also the lover of,
right?
Who also the teacher has a wife and family.
Yes, he is awful, and he's another one where you see at first maybe he's kind of a romantic figure, although we do get introduced to him with the idea that he had an affair with Miss Jean Brodie, and he has this wife and like more kids on the way. And as the movie goes on, he keeps having more and more kids. He has like 6 kids, I think, by the end of the movie. But yeah, I mean, she was his lover, and then she spurns him in favor of the music teacher, who's kind of a less interesting fellow, but
Lots of money, though.
more
He's
available,
rich.
right? Has money and is single. But she decides that sort of by proxy, she's going to be the lover of Mr. Lloyd by getting him to hook up with Jenny. And it's one of these, again, sort of instances of this like cult leader-ish manipulation that she has. And she's designated these girls. She's determined what their designations are. And part of the reason, part of Sandy's kind of rebellion against her is Sandy end up being the one who has an affair with Mr. Lloyd, which is also not, good. But I mean, that's her weird, twisted way of like rebelling against Miss Brodie.
Well, I guess so. I think one of the flaws in the film is, we see that she keeps pushing for this affair between Jenny and the art teacher, but like there is very little explanation of why, other than like, she's going to be about sex. She's a beauty. And it's like, I didn't really understand why she was pushing her into that.
I mean, I think it's meant to be, and I think Sandy says this at one point, maybe in that big confrontation at the end, the idea that Miss Brodie has decided that she can't be with Mr. Lloyd because he's married, because he has kids, because she's going to sleep with the more available teacher instead who can buy her stuff. But she's still horny for him. And so she wants the sort of vicarious experience of some hot young woman to be sleeping with him. And then she can get all the details because this is one of her acolytes. And we also get through the idea that Mr. Lloyd remains in love with Miss Brodie. I mean, the whole through line about him painting all these portraits of different people, but all the portraits look like her. And she's getting off on the idea that he's obsessed with her, but she won't let him have her.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Maybe that wasn't all that clear. I watched this movie on YouTube, Josh, and there is a scene where Mr. Lloyd is painting Sandy and she's nude, and they showed it on YouTube. I didn't know you could do that on YouTube.
I mean, you can't show this movie at all on YouTube because it's copyrighted. But
Josh, you're the one who sent me the link.
I did. I watched it on a DVD that was legally released, but we didn't have time to all get to that. So, yeah, I thought you were going to say that it was somehow censored or whatever. So, no, I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of movies that are legally uploaded on YouTube that feature nudity. And Pamela Franklin was not a minor at the time.
No, I wasn't
19.
saying that. I didn't think you could show nudity on YouTube.
Sure you can.
Well, tell me more. I'm just kidding.
I mean, I don't think they're showing pornography, but there are plenty of, R-rated movies that people upload to YouTube legitimately that they like own or whatever and have nudity. People can watch them.
Speaking of pornography, this is ripe for a pornographic takeoff, I'd say.
Well, let's not go there. But I mean,
crime of Miss Jean's body.
Yeah. I mean, that is definitely part of what she is sort of trying to convey there. Paul Schrader very much appreciated that aspect of the film.
Yeah.
He might watch my porno takeoff.
He would. He absolutely would. But I mean, I do think that moment is kind of shocking because even if the actress was older, right, the character is meant to be, like you said, maybe 17, maybe 18, but certainly young and impressionable, even though she's gotten older and she's the one of this group that's kind of the savviest, right? She's figured out Miss Jean Brodie's whole deal, but her, Mr. Lloyd is a creep and he certainly has manipulated her too in his own way. And so it's a uncomfortable situation, let's say.
Yes. I mean, but like you said, Sandy is also doing this to get back at Miss Jean Brodie. So she is active in the decision, right? It's her decision to do this more than...
Yeah, right. No, absolutely. It is her decision. But I think we're also meant to understand that, she's young and she's naive in her own way. And she's making this decision in part because of the sort of psychological torture that she's endured from Miss Jean Brodie.
Yeah, it's there are a number of films from like the 70s and the 80s where teachers and their students hook up, and it's much more humorous, Josh.
Right. I mean, I don't think we're meant to like root for this relationship or sympathize with Mr. Lloyd.
Josh, I don't think we're really supposed to sympathize with anyone.
No.
I mean, I think Sandy is sympathetic. I mean, even though she's a bit cruel there at the end, I mean, I think by the end of the movie, we've understood how terrible Miss Jean Brodie is, and we're rooting for her downfall, right?
So I'm gonna back up Sandy on this one, right? So spoilers coming. So get your YouTube link fired up before you listen to this part. Miss Jean Brodie constantly talking about fascism and the merits of these strong men, and she believes that Mary's brother is in Spain fighting for Franco, fighting for the good fight, and she says, "You must go over there and honor him and fight along with him," right? And she does, and then she gets killed. And then Sandy's like, "Hey, you're the reason she got killed. So you suck, Miss Jean Brodie. You suck. You know that?" And I kind of agree with Sandy on that one. She did get pushed. Talk about impressionable. Mary was very impressionable. She wasn't as mature as Sandy. So I think, that's a lot of her fault. And it turned out, of course, that Mary's brother was fighting for the anti-fascists, Josh.
Right. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think we're meant to understand and agree with Sandy there. The idea that, I mean, again, I feel like it has all this sad relevance to today, that these kind of influencers or whatever are saying these things, and the people who reap the consequences, maybe they're not dead or whatever, but who, the people who, for example, might have stormed the Capitol on January 6th and ended up in prison for it, right, are not those social media influencers, are not the Miss Jean Brodies of today. They are the Mary McGregors of today.
Yeah, Miss Jean Brodie would definitely storm the Capitol.
No, see, I think Miss Jean Brodie would not storm the Capitol. Miss Jean Brodie would sit at home and tweet about how awesome it is that other people are storming the Capitol.
She would demand that her students storm the Capitol for her.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the point, is that she doesn't have to really risk anything when she tells Mary McGregor, go off and fight for Franco. And she can, celebrate the sacrifice that has been made, that she says, was for, a great cause or whatever, but really ultimately is a sacrifice made for her, for Miss Jean Brodie.
I'm watching the movie, and we all know Maggie Smith is a legend, right? And I'm like, and she's good, but then I'm like, where is the key here? What am I missing? Why did she win Best Actress? And then you get to those confrontation scenes with Sandy, and that's where she really ratchets everything up, right? And of course, because she's a right-wing lunatic, she doesn't take any responsibility for her own actions, right? And she's yelling, "Assassin! You've assassinated me!" And it's like, she'd fit right in with the Trump campaign.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I think that's part of why this movie is still really fascinating to watch right now, is because you can see how all of that is still sadly relevant. But yeah, I agree that I think she's really good throughout. And part of it, again, is the subtlety of making you believe she's one kind of person when she's really this other kind of person underneath, and slowly revealing those layers. But yeah, those final confrontations with Sandy and Pamela Franklin, also really, really good in those scenes. And with the headmistress, when she realizes, she's been so confident for so long about how nothing can touch her. And every time the headmistress says, "Oh, you did this," she has a response and she gets to keep her job. And she realizes finally she's actually going to be fired. There's a lot of layers to that performance. There's a lot of, you can even feel for her in a way, because she's so deluded and remains deluded till the end.
I don't feel for her at all. She got what she deserved.
Well, that's fair. She certainly
out
did.
On the street. What do you think she does after this, Josh?
Well, sadly, Twitter didn't exist in 1933 or whatever,
Right.
So she's not able to make that pivot the way that
right. She would have to go
canceled.
write for Fox News today,
Right.
But in the 30s, I don't know what she does, except maybe she goes to, run the propaganda campaign for Franco or Mussolini or something like that.
Yeah, she becomes the head of the fascist party in Scotland or something like that, and does that. I mean, the other thing, of course, about the 1930s is that you can't get canceled, because she could just easily apply for a job somewhere else, and there's no way that they're necessarily going to find out what happened.
That's probably what she did. It's just that, I was a teacher at so-and-so school for 12 years. My girls love me. And then, okay, we'll hire you.
Right. Some other school will hire her, and she'll just find another group of impressionable girls to ruin.
Yeah, that's right. She really sucks.
She does. So, Dave, what'd you think of this film?
Yeah, I loved this movie. I've always gravitated towards movies about terrible people, and she is just a wonderful, terrible person. And yeah, the way that it's revealed, slowly but surely, I think is really great. And her performance is fantastic. And I think it gets super, super dark in ways that I was not expecting. And I just thought it was refreshing in that way. Just a movie about somebody who's really kind of just not redeemable at all.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, I think the way that it subverts your expectations like that is one thing that's so good about it. And I was wondering, coming into it this time, like, would I like it as much because of how I came into it that first time, not knowing anything about it? And I still really did, but I think being able to experience that the first time is one of the really exciting things about this film.
Yeah.
So, Josh, we talk about the headmistress who tries to fire her, right?
Yes.
And can't because Miss Jean Brodie kind of, knows her way around and also has tenure and everything like that. She is also not that much of a likable character, but in the end, she's just right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the other thing is that you are sort of, primed to assume that that's the villain, right? That that's the person to dislike. And she doesn't become super likable. But at the same time, again, we realize at the end that she is absolutely in the right here. And maybe she's stuffy and other ways that she runs the school are not great. But in this particular instance, she's totally correct.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's an interesting film because of all these elements. I'm glad. Did you ever have a teacher like Miss Jean Brodie?
I mean, not one who tried to encourage me to support fascism, thankfully. I mean,
nor one who pimped you out to other teachers.
Right. No, thankfully, I never had those experiences. I hope you didn't either. I mean, do you mean like a teacher who I thought was like brilliant and inspiring and then realized was terrible later on?
Yeah. Pretty much like when you were that guy's lackey for the weekend.
You know what? So. I was going to say that because I don't believe that I ever had a teacher with that experience. I mean, I had some teachers who I did find inspiring, and thankfully, if they were terrible, I never learned it. But I think that experience with that guy who was sort of my mentor, or who I thought could be my mentor in a professional capacity, and then over time I realized was terrible. That
I had that too. More. That's funny. Yeah, because I was at that same age. I was, just out of college and, making my rounds in Hollywood, which clearly have worked out exactly as we thought they would. Mm. And I had like a mentor who turned out to be like a psychopath and would like, manipulate and play mind games and gaslight me and everything. And I was too young and naive to understand it. Right. So I relate to these girls, Josh. I relate to these Catholic schoolgirls all too much.
Yeah, but you never had a teacher like that.
No, but we did have teachers who developed that following and not saying anything negative. Like, for instance, our former guest, who's no longer with us, sadly, Francisco Menendez, definitely had like a following of students at UNLV because he was captivating and riveting and, you wanted to be around him. And I think in high school, Mr. Baranoff, our history teacher, was similar like in that, there are a lot of great teachers who can kind of hook you in, and then it depends what they decide to do with that hook.
Right. And I think especially in college that happens. And I remember there being a philosophy or religion or something professor when I was in college, and I took a class with him, and I wasn't, part of this cult, I think in part because he was relatively young. I don't know how old he actually was, but he might have been only in his, early 30s or something with these college students. And, he was a relatively young, relatively attractive guy. And I think he maybe attracted a cult of young women who he may not have entirely behaved appropriately with. But
yeah, I mean, again, so look, not saying anything beyond like this was 1933, right? Like, I don't even know if that would be considered in 1933 inappropriate, honestly. Like, I think that would be considered like, oh, that's just something that happens and maybe she'll go off and marry the teacher or something like that.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, I think in 1933, what would be considered inappropriate is the fact that Mr. Lloyd is married, right?
Right.
And that regardless of how old his, mistress is, whether it's Miss Jean Brodie in her 30s or one of these students, it's not appropriate because he's married. And that's the reason.
Yeah. Also not appropriate sending your students off to fight for fascist causes so they die.
Yes. And it's interesting that's what she gets fired for, right? Ultimately, that's what Sandy gets her on, is the idea that she has been, encouraging fascism among the students, and that's a fireable offense.
Right. And so we mentioned in the book, there are 6 girls, and here they made it 4. And in the book, Mary, I don't think, dies from that. And it was a really effective change to combine those 2 characters and have that be the reason that this kind of whole, facade came crumbling down on Jean Brodie's head.
Yeah, because like you said, we see that Mary is so impressionable. And so it makes sense that she would be the one who would try to kind of like show how devoted she is to Miss Jean Brodie by doing this.
What did you think of the ending? Because to me, I thought the ending, it was over, right? To me, it was over already. We have that big scene where she calls her an assassin, and then Sandy fires back and is like, hey, you suck. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, right?
Yes.
But to me, that was pretty much the end of it. And then you see the empty hall and Sandy walking out and Miss Jean Brodie, and there's nothing but emptiness there, right? And then there's I don't want to call it a coda, but there's another scene after where Sandy's walking down the street and she's wondering if, she did the right thing or the wrong thing. And you have this voiceover of Jean Brodie like, once I meet a girl of an impressionable age, she'll be mine forever, right? It was kind of an unnecessary tack on. I didn't think it subtracted, but it didn't really add anything for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's a repeat of a line that she says earlier in the film. And I think maybe the idea there is that even though we've seen Sandy kind of, quote, defeat her, that what has she done? I mean, we have also seen, again, that Sandy went and had this affair that she would not have certainly gone into were it not for Miss Jean Brodie. Like, what has that influence kind of done to her, and where will that take her going forward? And because in the movie, we don't see what's in the novel, the idea that she becomes a nun or whatever, we can imagine how it might have messed her up for her future life.
Yeah, I mean, so I feel like we get those points across in the scene before, because Sandy's like firing at her, you did this. And then she's like, I got fired because of this. And Sandy almost tears up like, well, what are you going to do? Right. And then she's got these mixed emotions. So in a way, I just felt like the beat was already there and effective, and it wasn't necessary. Like I said, it didn't diminish anything, but I don't think it added anything for me.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it didn't bother me. And I felt like it was fair to kind of end on that. And, and they give Miss Jean Brodie the last word, which is what she would, of course, want. And, show that that's still what she's able to do, I guess.
I guess. But to me, I almost wonder if it's more effective if, we have Sandy walking out and the end is, that complete loss of power over someone.
Right.
And I feel like that shows, the full journey.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we want, right? We want to believe that she's lost that power, but I think they're maybe trying to remind you that she still has some of it. And as we said, who knows where she'll go after this and just take that power and use it against someone else.
Right. She's not going to learn any lessons from this.
No, 100% not. Never. So should we rate this out of 4 fascists, 4 fascist dictators, 5 fascist dictators? Yeah, what am I doing?
5 fascist dictators / illicit art teacher affairs.
Sure, both of those things.
I gave it 3. It's fine. It's good. And there's nudity on YouTube. Who knew?
I will accept your grudging praise. I give this a 4 out of 5. I still, again, really liked it, and I wasn't sure if it would be as effective this time, but I think it's great. It's super underrated, and it is unfortunately not widely available to stream, but it is on DVD if you have a library card here in Las Vegas.
Also streamable on
and
YouTube.
Elsewhere. Yeah, for now. We'll see how long that lasts. But I do hope more people check this out, and maybe it'll get a wider release at some point. So 4 fascist dictators from me. Dave, how would you rate this?
I'm also going with 4. Good pick, Josh.
Oh, thank you, Dave. So we'll come back and talk about the legacy of the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we are talking about my pick, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. And as we said, this is an adaptation of a book and a play, and it was adapted again. I've not seen this, and I don't know, this is even harder, I think, to find, but there was a mini-series version of it in 1978 starring Geraldine McEwen as Miss Brodie, 7 episodes that delves, I think, in more into the lives of the girls, in different episodes. So could be interesting.
It was an interesting structure in that each episode kind of looked at different relationships. That's what I was kind of taken by, like, oh, this is the idea of, Miss Jean Brodie's relationship with an exchange student, right, who came from Italy, whose dad had to flee the country because Mussolini, didn't have a freedom of press there and stuff like that. So I think that's pretty cool. Jay Presson Allen also had adapted that, which I think is a no-brainer. One of the great screenwriters of all time, Marnie, Cabaret, Funny Lady, Prince of the City. Come on.
Yeah, she was very successful at a time when there weren't a lot of female screenwriters, was also a successful playwright. I mean, of course, wrote this as a play and other adaptations, including the English language version of La Cage aux Folles, Birdcage, created the TV series Family, which was a big sensation in, I think it was the 70s mostly. So quite a career that she had.
And Josh, she attended Miss Hockaday's School for Young Ladies in Dallas. So I feel like she was ready to write this one.
Yeah, maybe even though she didn't originate the story, but certainly had some experiences there. So Jason, you, as you said, watched a couple additional Ronald Neame movies this week.
Yes, I did. So first I watched Hopscotch, which you alerted me to, which is a great, interesting movie from 1980 where Walter Matthau plays like a CIA agent who gets shelved. So he decides like, hey, know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to write the entire story of everything I've been through for the last 30 years. I'm going to go on the run and outsmart the CIA, and I'm going to send different chapters to all the different intelligence agencies around the world. And as they chase me, I'm just going to keep one step ahead. It's a real good cat and mouse movie. Obviously, Matthau just kills it. I really liked the movie. There's one part at the end that kind of didn't necessarily compute for me, but I would definitely recommend that. And then I went and, did a rewatch of the Poseidon Adventure from the 70s, Gene Hackman on a boat that turns upside down, a disaster film from the 70s. And I don't think Neame does a great job of like showcasing the geography of like after the boat tilts, but it's still like a good, effective, easy popcorn movie. And Hackman's, obviously great.
Jason, you told me that I had recommended this movie, Hopscotch, and I told you I didn't remember seeing it. I did watch this movie. It was the #1 movie at the box office on the day I was born in 1980, and that's why I looked it up when we were doing the 1980 season of Awesome Movie Year, and I just randomly watched it. And yeah, it's really good. I just forgot the title of it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we talked about it in our 1980 epilogue when you mentioned having done that, and that was why I thought to recommend it to Jason, or I didn't have a chance to watch it. I was going to try to watch it too, because I remembered that you had watched it for that reason and liked it.
Yeah, no, it was a really fun movie.
Yeah. So, I mean, Neame's an interesting filmmaker. I think there's a lot more to check out. I mean, he directed I Could Go On Singing, Judy Garland's last performance, and Scrooge, which we might get to on a Christmas episode at some point in time, Albert Finney. He's got a BAFTA Academy Fellowship Award, which is the highest award you can get from the BAFTAs. So I'm glad we got to him. I did see that Michael Winner was originally set to direct this. That would have been different.
Yeah, I don't know if that's really, you want the Death Wish guy directing this film, but
I mean, is there that much of a difference?
I feel like, actually, Paul Kersey, the hero of Death Wish, and Miss Jean Brodie might have a lot in common, come to think of it.
Right.
I think the difference, though, is those Death Wish movies are 100% on the side of the right-wing fascist hero, whereas this movie is more complex than that. But unfortunately, I did want to watch Hopscotch, but I didn't get a chance to. I have seen that Scrooge that he directed, though, with Albert Finney, which is a fun one. And I just think he's fascinating, again, because he had this like several careers in Hollywood, and he has 3 Oscar nominations, none of which are for directing. As you said, he was nominated twice for screenwriting for the work that he did with David Lean on Great Expectations and Brief Encounter. But before that, he was nominated for a Best Special Effects Oscar for the film One of Our Aircraft is Missing, because he worked as a camera operator and cinematographer on that movie and, worked on the effects. So many different aspects of filmmaking that he worked on throughout this very long career.
Yep. So check him out.
Of course, Maggie Smith, huge star.
By the way, how'd you like my Maggie Smith impression?
It was pretty good, actually, I think. Right. I don't know if you worked on that, but I was surprised how good it was.
It's not an easy one to pull off, guys.
No, you did a good job there. And she certainly, I think you watch this movie, and even though she's much younger here, once she starts speaking, if you only know her from later stuff, if you've seen her on Downton Abbey or whatever, it's like, oh, right, that's Maggie Smith. I think she did so many big things like Downton Abbey and the Harry Potter movies and The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, like much later in her career. People know her more for those things nowadays, but she had this very long career. She was nominated for 6 Oscars over the time. She, of course, won for this film as well as for California Suite from an awesome movie year favorite, Herbert Ross, which I have not seen.
I haven't seen it either, but now that I know it's Herbert Ross, I'm gonna. She's got, as you said, 2 Oscars, 5 BAFTAs, 4 Emmy Awards, 3 Golden Globes, a Tony for Lettuce and Lovage. So, we can go down. Obviously, like you said, most people probably know her best from Harry Potter and Downton Abbey now. But, just look at everything she's done, from Gosford Park to A Room with a View, Othello, Death on the Nile. Like she's a legend, not just a legend, but regarded with Judi Dench as like the greatest British actors of their generation, or actresses, and deservedly so.
Yeah, absolutely. I just rewatched that version of Death on the Nile fairly recently, and she's very entertaining in this cast that is like full of like big stars of the 1970s. And she's still working. She's 89 and she has like at least one film in production at the moment. So hopefully she will continue on. And there's another Downton Abbey movie being made. So they keep hinting that her character is going to die in these Downton Abbey, in like the finale and the movies. But then she's still around, and that's wonderful.
They should use her as much as they can. Maggie Smith, one of a pair of married actors in this film. She was married to Robert Stevens, who played the art teacher, also married our Gordon Jackson and Rona Anderson in this film, Josh, in real life.
And she played the science teacher who he ends up getting married to, kind of a small part. But Maggie Smith and Robert Stevens weren't married for very long. But those two were married for decades until one of their deaths. Right. And
Gordon Jackson was Lothar, the music teacher. But Stevens, Josh, was the art teacher, a huge presence in British theater. They said he was the natural successor to Laurence Olivier. So high praise. Movies including Cleopatra, the Private Life of Sherlock Holmes. And we keep coming back to 1968's Romeo and Juliet.
And most of these actors did very active in British TV, film, stage. Gordon Jackson as well, known for his long-running role on Upstairs, Downstairs, which was a huge influence on Downton Abbey. I do want to mention, Pamela Franklin is so good in this film as Sandy, and she was a very well-regarded child actor. She's in The Innocents with Deborah Kerr, which is a fantastic movie, and she's so good and creepy in that movie. And The Nanny with Bette Davis, another really fun movie. And as she got older, she felt like she wasn't offered the same kind of interesting parts as an adult that she was as a child. So she was known for starring in some kind of B-movie horror things later in her career and did a lot of TV guest spots, but eventually retired from acting in 1981. So it's a shame that she wasn't able to make that transition, because she's really, really good here.
I agree. 70s Scream Queen, Necromancy, The Legend of Hell House. Josh, you did not mention Jane Carr, who played Mary McGregor, and her fine work in Garfield, A Tale of Two Kitties.
Yeah, she does. She's still working. I think she's the only one of the child actors from this who is still working now and does a lot of voice work in films such as that. But another horror credit of Pamela Franklin's, Satan's School for Girls. alternate title for this film, perhaps.
Yeah. There you go.
So anything else you want to mention about the legacy of this movie?
Nah.
All right. Well, I'm glad you gave that a lot of thought.
I really did.
Answering. So that is the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can influence us on social media and online.
Yeah, throw all your right-wing slander over. Please don't. We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, the platform.
Yeah.
So, I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or Jay Harris Comedy, and all those things. Look out for Eat This Comedy. We had a great show, Josh, at Echo and Rig. More coming up.
All right. You can find some old stuff from me, including probably what I wrote about this when I first saw it at joshbellhateseverything.com. I am at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on Miss Jean Brodie's favorite platform, X Twitter, as well as on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd. And if you're on Letterboxd and you watch this film or any of the movies we talk about on the show, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We'd love to know what you think. And listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod, and join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces.
Jason, what's in our next episode?
Josh, I'm excited. We're going to Greece for the first time, at least from a Greek filmmaker. We're going to watch Z, the Costa-Gavras classic.
So tune in next time for Z, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.